I was watching the Nuggets defend the Nets the other day, and something really jumped out to me about how successful this late game possession was. But this wasn't about extra effort or special focus. It was because of a defensive strategy designed to protect weak defenders, and I think it might have massive ramifications for playoff basketball. For a long time, weak defenders were put on the worst scorer that they could reasonably defend. For instance, Steve Nash would guard Derek Fisher, and that was his matchup for most of the game. He wouldn't have to worry about defending Kobe Bryant, except for maybe a cross match in transition. But in the last decade, we've seen more and more pick and roll, and to make it easier to guard that deadly action, more and more teams started switching, and that changed everything. Because it meant offenses could start targeting players by bringing them into the pick and roll and hunting the switch that the offense wanted. LeBron James was perhaps the first superstar to popularize this tactic, constantly going after a team's weakest defender, like Steph Curry, in order to create a mismatch and attack. Attacking mismatches in pick and roll isn't just about smaller players, though. Nash targeted the Lakers' big men in 2010, and elite rim protectors are susceptible to severe cooking if they venture out against elite shooters and ball handlers. Even when defenses weren't switching, big men were vulnerable to pull-up threes from these shooters, so they've been dragged into pick-and-roll actions mercilessly if they can't move well in space. As targeting weaker defenders became more popular, defenses looked for ways to avoid these mismatches, which led to pre-switching, a tactic to avoid the pick-and-roll for a targeted player by switching away from the ball so another teammate runs into the screening action instead. In last year's finals, Boston also pre-switched to keep Rob Williams closer to the basket and away from Curry. Grant Williams is waiting for someone to set a screen, follows a screener, but that's a decoy, so Kevon Looney can escort Rob into the action, only Grant reads it and switches into the pick and roll anyway. Having versatile defenders like this means there are no mismatches, and it ends up in a stop. Of course, there are counters to these counters. Here, Al Horford takes Rob's man, so Draymond Green sprints into the action to set a second pick, and Williams needs to come out because of Curry's shooting, and with Marcus Smart chasing him around the screen, Rob's actually able to block Curry's jumper, which is a great reminder that mismatches in basketball aren't 100% propositions. There's no such thing as a guaranteed bucket, and by looking for mismatches, teams are turning 40% attempts into 50 or 60% shots. Another way to force a mismatch is to have the target's man bring up the ball, pass it, and immediately go set the screen. This way, there's no one around for Curry to pre-switch with, and he has to join that pick and roll dance. So Golden State counters by double teaming, which forces a pass, and they recover to prevent any advantage. Even when a weaker defender is dragged into the pick and roll game, a hedge or hard show at the ball can avoid a switch. And the goal here is to slow down the dribbler so the other defender can recover, avoiding any switch while minimizing the advantage of the screen. Because hedging or showing temporarily puts two defenders on the ball, it can still leave defenses exposed. So, in order to plug that leak, there's yet another tactic that has emerged, which requires team-wide coordination and might just be an antidote to protect vulnerable defenders in the playoffs. The pick and roll has always been part of the NBA, and so has switching. Traditionally, switching was simple. If two defenders switched, they would guard each other's man. You take my guy, I take your guy. But more complicated switches have been around for decades, and the rise in switches involving multiple players is a key step in this tactical arms race. There's a ton going on here. Dallas wants to put Curry in the screening action. Steph pre-switches with Draymond to avoid it, so they just send up a second screener to drag Curry into the pick and roll. He hedges to avoid the switch, but instead of recovering to his man, Draymond rotates over and Steph peels out to Green's man, and all of a sudden there's no advantage. This kind of peel switch happens when a defender is recovering, a teammate helps, and instead of trying to catch up, he switches off to the helper's man. This has been around for a long time. Back in the 1988 finals, Dennis Rodman follows Magic Johnson around a screen, then when help comes, he peels off to take away a would-be layup. Switching like this is so powerful because it quickly erases an offensive advantage. Here's a traditional approach where Philly traps the ball handler, so one defender sprints back to the paint while help contains the ball. Then that helper still has to sprint out to the corner. Playing things straight up like this can force weak side defenders to help in one direction, then turn and sprint back out to the perimeter. But the peel switch is far more economical. Curry's man slips backdoor, and when Klay Thompson helps, instead of recovering and then asking Klay to recover himself, Steph just peel switches directly to Klay's man, and the defense is completely reset. And even after a direct pass to the corner, the possession goes nowhere. Here's an example in pick and roll, where Curry shows himself in front of the ball, a teammate slides over to pick up the screener, so Curry peels off to take his man, and again there's no mismatch to hunt. This time they take it further, with Curry momentarily stopping the ball. The next defender over picks up the roll man, and as Curry recovers, Draymond slides up to the wing so Curry can peel all the way to the corner. And think about what's happened here. Curry can't recover faster than the ball to the roll man. He can't recover faster than Draymond to the opposite wing, but he can beat the ball to the opposite corner. We saw the Mavs use this last year to protect Luka Doncic, briefly hedging, with each defender shifting over to the next man as Luka just peeled off to the nearest opponent. And while there are different terms for this full team-wide rotation, I'm calling it the shift. Compare this shift to a more traditional approach, where the Raptors briefly double James Harden, but as the help comes to pick up the screener, that targeted defender doesn't peel off anywhere, instead trying to get back in front of his original man. So there's no shift, the defense is still compromised, and it's an easy dunk. Also note what happens when the shift is late. The nearest defender isn't there to meet the ball, the next defender is vulnerable closing out to the corner, and the offense always stays one step ahead. We're also seeing this shift on straightforward double teams, where the next defender slides over, which triggers another short rotation behind him, and meanwhile Chris Paul just peels off to the open man on the weak side, and there's no tax to pay for him guarding Luka. A traditional double team often involved a defender leaving his man, then recovering back out to that same player without extra rotations. Even more complex doubles from the weak side still saw defenders trying to recover back to their own man and avoid switching, whereas today teams aren't worried about a small guard switched onto Shaq in the post, so they just shift defenders around freely on the perimeter, making this tactic possible. It actually doesn't quite work as well with slow-footed big men helping. They double to protect Curry here, the Warriors shift everyone over, but Kevon Looney can't contain the ball, so it's a breakdown anyway. But when a big man like Nikola Jokic is on the ball, look at how economical this is. The double comes, everyone shifts one place for the Nuggets, and the original double teamer only has to recover back into the paint area. And that brings us back to the Nuggets and Jokic, who has traditionally been targeted in pick and roll in the playoffs because of his lack of mobility. Denver's typically had Jokic hedge to avoid switches, but that still creates a 4-on-3 away from the ball. But against Brooklyn, they'd just have him switch the pick and roll, then send a double team, which triggered the shift while Jokic comfortably peeled off into the paint, and that's where his size helps the most anyway, so this one worked out perfectly for the Nuggets. Coach Michael Malone's idea here is that, ironically, he nullifies the advantage of the screen by having Jokic switch, then protects him in isolation by sending a double, because the shift prevents an advantage while Jokic can recover to the nearest defender. Even when they bring Jokic back up again, he's looking to switch and peel off. Aaron Gordon's a little late to shift over, but it's wide right. Since Brooklyn had no big men in this lineup, Jokic doesn't even look to pre-switch here. He just chases Mikal Bridges outside the arc, the late double comes, the shift is on, and Jeff Green kills the pass, and it's a shot clock violation. Of course, this switch and shift tactic isn't a cure-all. It requires timely reads and reactions. Spencer Dinwiddie knows it's coming, so he dribbles backwards to get Jokic to peel off, then drives at Jokic to keep Jamal Murray behind him, and this defender probably needs to recover earlier out to the wing, but he's a little too late. Ultimately, there's probably no way to truly hide the weakest defender on a basketball court. Defense is too coordinated and dependent on the weakest link. And of course, movement or better isolation players might attack Jokic or other defenders before that double team can even come. But peel switching and these team-level rotational shifts have become viable ways for defenses to protect their most vulnerable defenders out there, and I'm excited to see just how successful these tactics are in playoff basketball. To support this channel, check out patreon.com/thinkingbasketball. Deluxe members can access our proprietary stats board with tons of data about teams and players that I use to research podcasts and these videos. I'm personally fascinated by peel switching and how these techniques continue to evolve, so let me know what you think down below. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I hope that you are having a great day.